For my next project, I've decided to do another Pat Tritle Porter after my first one crashed last February that I built in 2010. For electronics, I'm using a firepower 250 slow fly motor, a 20 amp power up ESC with a 3 amp UB spliced into the input connectors, 5 gram iFlight servos for the wings, and 9 gram Tower Pro carbon fiber geared servos for the tail. I started with the tail first, starting with the elevator and the horizontal stabilizer. And then the vertical stabilizer, I added cross bracing to make it strong because that was a weak point on the first Pilatus Porter. Then I did the rudder. Next, I built both fuselage side frames, pinned them over the plans, added the top formers from the front to the end, making sure it was nice and straight. Then I epoxied all aluminum tubes on. Also built the front section using the same method. Added the motor mount, the motor, followed by the landing gear mount and all the bottom formers and stringers. I mounted the ESC, UBC, and receiver on the landing gear mount, followed by the 2 servos on the balsa planks on the fuselage. Then I mounted the tail so I could run the elevator push rod, which is now installed. Next, I turned the fuselage over and did the tail block, which is basically some solid balsa cut sand to shape and then sealed up with polyurethane. Instead of using wood or file folder paper, I used some heavy bond white paper I found, which will match the color scheme. So I cut both frames out and glued them on both sides of the fuselage with Formula 560 glue. Then I attached each wing strut receiver tube on the fuselage. Another weak spot on my first Porter was definitely the tail wheel, so I changed that by first attaching aluminum tube instead of just straight on wire for the tail wheel. And then I bent the tail wheel using my Dupro Easy Bender, which made the landing gear 10 times easier. Added the wheel and a wheel collar on top, and the brass tube for the control horn, which is basically just crimped down. And now the tail wheel is pretty strong. The biggest modification I want to do is the main gear, so I got a bunch of aluminum brass tubes that were lightweight. And before I made the second bend on each strut, I added the tube in, crimped it on each side to stay in place. Once I got all 6 struts done, I could put them together, and the way it worked out, all 3 could plug into one tube, as you see in this picture, which makes soldering super easy. I'll decide if I want to make them removable later or not, but right now they work pretty good. Here's a good comparison between the foam crap I put on the first Porter and the nice aluminum tubes I just did on the second one. Now that I finally have my camera back, I'm going to go over all the stuff I've done so far. I just finished the main landing gear, and for a cheap and simple way to get that nice, thick, and fat strut look, I just got some aluminum tubes, crimped them on each end. I just see up there, and kind of glue them in a little, keep them in place, and it worked great. This one also has a brass tube in it, and these straws, I'm going to use them to make the bungee by cutting the bendy part out and painting it black, just gluing it on there. Motor, it's installed. I had to extend it forward with some washers later so it would fit in the cowling. Had to extend the motor wires for the ESC, which is mounted right there, and it's a little messy right here where the receiver goes right over the landing gear mount. Got the servos in and the elevator push rod. And I just finished the tail wheel. And I put the control horn on by soldering it. It's basically a brass tube crimped to a flat shape, and I'll be using pull wires to connect to the servo. Same with the rudder, so I'll see you in part 2.